Welcome, welcome, welcome to Off the Edge Deep Dive, the podcast where we jump headfirst into the most thrilling, thought-provoking, and sometimes jaw-dropping topics with your hosts, Cal and Tam. Let's take a deep dive into science, technology, culture, and everything in between. No shallow waters here, folks. So buckle up, because we're about to push the boundaries and go off the edge.
We're diving into a story that I'm sure has shaken a lot of people, especially those in New York City.
Yeah, for sure.
A woman was tragically murdered on the subway just a few days before Christmas.
Awful.
And, I can only imagine how much more this hits close to home if you're in or near the city.
Absolutely.
So to unpack this whole story, we have two sources we're going to be looking at today.
Okay, sounds good.
One is a Fox News article, and that one details the crime itself
Right.
and the arrest of a suspect.
Right.
And then we have a Newsweek article, and that one goes more into the anxieties that migrants in the U.S. are facing, especially with the new Trump administration.
Interesting.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to examine all the facts of this crime, which is very disturbing, and then kind of go into the much larger and more complex world of immigration policy and how that impacts the experiences of migrants in the U.S.
Okay.
Our goal here is to present the information from both of these articles responsibly and without taking sides.
Right. Just the facts. We'll be your guides through all this, and we'll help you understand the different perspectives.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, so let's start with that Fox News article. Let's try to figure out what happened on that Brooklyn-bound F train early Sunday morning.
Yeah, let's do it.
And the details here are pretty disturbing.
Yeah, the article paints a very chilling picture.
Oh, yeah.
So you have this woman just sitting on the train, and as the train pulls into the Stillwell Avenue station, a man walks up to her, and he sets her clothes on fire with a lighter.
Oh, my God.
And the police say she was completely engulfed in flames within seconds.
That's awful. The police, though, they were already at the station, right?
Right.
So they immediately saw the smoke and flames coming from the train.
Yeah, and this is where it gets even more unsettling.
Okay.
The suspect didn't run away.
Really?
Yeah, the article says that he just sat calmly on a bench on the platform as officers and even an MTA worker rushed over to put out the flames.
Oh, my gosh.
They used a fire extinguisher, but sadly for the victim, it was too late.
Oh, that's awful.
A really horrific scene.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the quick response, which is good,
Yeah.
but it just goes to show how brutal and seemingly random this attack was.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a small glimmer of hope in this story, though.
Okay.
The article highlights the actions of 3 high school students, and they played a huge role in the suspect's arrest.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So they saw photos that the police had released, and they recognized the man on another train.
Wow.
And they immediately called 911.
Good for them.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So transit officers were able to apprehend him, thankfully, without incident, thanks to those kids.
That's amazing. Really speaks to the power of community, even when faced with a tragedy like this.
Absolutely. So the suspect has been identified as 33-year-old Sebastian Zapeta, a Guatemalan migrant.
Okay.
And the Fox News article states that he entered the U.S. illegally during Trump's first term back in 2018. However, we do have another source, and this one's from NDTV, and they say that the authorities are actually still verifying his immigration status.
That's interesting. So we have some conflicting details.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder that information, especially in a story that's developing like this, can change.
Right.
So it really highlights why it's important to check multiple sources and, verify that information before we jump to any conclusions.
Absolutely. You got to be careful about that.
Exactly. Me, I love connecting the dots, but sometimes you just got to wait for the full picture to come out.
Right.
And one thing that both articles don't mention is a motive.
Yeah, it's normal to want to know the why behind such a terrible act. But as we've talked about before, it's really important to avoid speculation.
Yeah, for sure.
The investigation is still ongoing, and until we get more information, it's best to stick to the facts and let the authorities do their job.
For sure. This case is really unsettling, especially happening right before Christmas.
I know, it's awful.
It casts such a dark shadow over what should be a happy time.
Yeah. And it's especially important to remember that this is happening with the backdrop of renewed debates and anxiety around immigration in the U.S.
Right.
This is a very complex and emotionally charged topic.
Absolutely. And this leads us perfectly to that second source, the Newsweek article.
Okay.
It explores the fears and uncertainties that a lot of migrants are facing with Trump back in the White House. And he's promised stricter immigration policies, including mass deportations.
Right. So this is where those two stories, as different as they seem, may actually start to intersect.
Oh, guys, see what you're saying.
The attack on the subway feeds into the fears and anxieties that already exist, and then those anxieties within the migrant community are heightened by all of these potential changes coming up.
So they're kind of playing out at the same time.
Exactly.
And creating this really complicated and confusing situation for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So how do we make sense of all of this? Let's look at this Newsweek article. What were some of the key takeaways you found?
Well, I thought the article did a great job of bringing this issue to life through personal stories.
Right.
So instead of just focusing on all the statistics and policy debates, it gives a voice to those who are directly affected by these changes.
That's a good point. It reminds us that behind all the headlines and the politics, there are real people
Exactly.
with real hopes and fears and families just trying to build a future.
Right, and sometimes understanding those experiences can help us understand the bigger picture in a much more meaningful way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the Newsweek article highlights a few really powerful stories, and it really kind of brings this issue to life, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like there's this 23-year-old filmmaker from Nigeria living in Arizona.
Okay.
He came to the U.S. legally with his family when he was younger, but their visa expired.
Oh.
So now, with Trump winning and all of his views on immigration, he's terrified of being deported to a country that he barely remembers.
Wow.
He says that he feels paralyzed, like he has no control over his own future.
That's got to be a horrible feeling.
It is.
Just to think about what that must be like for him and so many others that are in the same situation.
Yeah, it's tough.
That fear of deportation, of having your life totally uprooted, that's a recurring theme throughout the entire article.
Oh, yeah, and it's not just individuals that are impacted by this.
Yeah.
It's families, too.
Of course.
The article brings up a story of a couple in New Jersey, and they're facing the possibility of being separated.
Oh, wow.
So the husband, he entered the U.S. illegally back in 2004.
Okay.
And he's been married for almost 8 years now. And he even filed for a provisional unlawful presence waiver, but his future is still so uncertain.
Oh, gosh. I can't even imagine the stress and anxiety that that couple must be going through.
I know, it's a lot.
You try to build a life together, you're creating a family, and then there's this massive cloud just hanging over everything.
Yeah, and the wife actually says something in the article that's really powerful.
What does she say?
She says that when Trump won, it felt like a direct rejection of everything they had been pleading for, like stability and just being able to keep their family together.
Yeah.
And she says, we're asking for the bare minimum just to have peace of mind that our spouses won't be deported, and we can't even get that.
Wow. It's a really powerful statement. Really puts a face on the issue and reminds us that we're not just talking about some abstract policies or statistics.
Exactly.
These are real families with real lives that are being impacted by these decisions.
Absolutely. And, you know, it raises some really tough questions.
Like what?
Or like, how do we define what a threat to public safety is? Where do we draw the line? And how do we balance the need for security with compassion and recognizing that so many of these individuals are actually contributing to society?
Right. It's like this balancing act.
Yeah, like walking a tightrope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's even more challenging when you consider how much strong rhetoric there is around this entire issue.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The article quotes Trump's transition team, and they said that they'll use every federal and state power necessary to deport migrant criminals.
Every federal and state power necessary.
Yeah, and that's pretty broad.
It is. That doesn't really give you a sense of security if you're someone who could be impacted by that.
No, not at all. You're constantly wondering, you know, what does that actually mean and how far are they willing to go with this?
Exactly. And Trump has even talked about using the military for his immigration plan.
Yeah, he has. And that just brings up a whole other set of questions and concerns.
It feels like a very serious escalation.
It does.
But the article does present some different viewpoints from people in law enforcement. Like we mentioned Sheriff Thaddeus Cleveland earlier, and he thinks that these enforcement efforts will likely be more targeted.
Yeah, so focusing on the people who actually pose a threat to public safety.
So instead of these mass roundups or, going door to door, it seems like the focus will be more on the people that have committed more serious crimes.
Right.
So it sounds like there's some disagreement over how these deportations will actually happen.
There is.
But if we put the human cost aside for a second,
Okay.
just the logistical and financial implications of mass deportations are enormous.
Oh, absolutely. The American Immigration Council, and they were cited in the article,
Right.
they estimate that to deport 11 to 14 million people, which is what Trump has talked about,
Yeah.
that could cost upwards of $315 billion.
Wow.
That's more than the entire GDP of so many countries.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, where's that money coming from and what programs would be cut because of this? It's such
Right.
a huge financial burden, and that's not even considering the impact it would have on the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about all the industries that rely on migrant labor.
Right, like agriculture, construction, hospitality.
Exactly.
Mass deportations would affect everything.
Yeah, it'd be like a ripple effect.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell what the long-term consequences would even be.
It really is just a massive web of interconnected issues.
It is.
And Newsweek does a good job of bringing it back down to the human level by looking at Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, it's a good case study.
So Denver has declared itself a sanctuary city. So that means that local law enforcement, they don't really cooperate with federal immigration authorities.
Right, they kind of do their own thing.
Yeah, and it's become like a safe haven for migrants.
It has.
But it's unclear what's going to happen to the city and to the Trump administration.
Yeah, who knows?
The article introduces us to Rosmely Perez, and she's a legal immigrant from Venezuela.
Okay,
And she came to Denver with her family to try to make a better life for themselves.
good for them.
Yeah. And she talks about how much support she's gotten from the city.
That's great.
But she's still afraid of what a Trump presidency could mean for her family's future.
Yeah, I bet.
And I think her story shows just how challenging and contradictory this whole immigration debate is.
Yeah, I really do.
You know, Denver has made this commitment to welcome and support migrants.
Yeah,
They provide resources, housing assistance, and even legal aid.
that's amazing.
I know, it's great. But all of these new arrivals have put a strain on the city's resources. And the article says that Denver has spent tens of millions of dollars to help these new arrivals.
Wow.
I know it's a lot. And while a lot of residents support this approach, some are worried about how long these programs can actually last.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's a balancing act for sure.
It is, and it'll definitely be tested under Trump.
Yeah, how so?
Well, sanctuary cities could be challenged legally, they could get their funding cut, and there could be more pressure to cooperate with deportation efforts.
Wow, so you have a city that's trying to do the right thing, trying to be welcoming to these people seeking refuge.
Yeah,
But they have all this pressure and uncertainty coming their way.
exactly. And it's basically a smaller version of the immigration debate happening across the entire country.
Right. So how do we figure this out?
Yeah, how do we balance compassion with being practical?
Exactly. How do we protect those that are vulnerable and address the concerns about security and the rule of law?
Yeah, that's the question.
There's no easy answers here.
Not at all.
It's a very complex and emotionally charged issue, and it's one that we need to really pay attention to and think about carefully.
I agree.
Man, it feels like we're at a crossroads with all of this.
It really does.
You know, this horrific crime in New York, the anxieties from all the migrants across the country, and then the upcoming changes to immigration policies.
Yeah, it's heavy.
It really is a lot to process.
And that's why I think the Newsweek article focusing on Denver is so important.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, it makes us look beyond the headlines and all the political stuff and actually deal with the real-world consequences of these decisions.
Right. You're totally right. Rosmely's story, I think, really hits that point home.
Yeah.
You know, she's a legal immigrant, but even she's feeling all of this uncertainty.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine living with that constant fear,
I know, it's tough.
not knowing if you're going to be able to stay in a country that you've chosen to be your home.
Right, and it really emphasizes the fact that this isn't just about undocumented immigrants. This goes so much further than that. Of course. It affects families, communities, and entire industries.
It really does.
The article said that the American Immigration Council is projecting that something like 4 million mixed-status families could be separated because of Trump's plan.
Wow.
That's a crazy amount of people, and that means U.S. citizens with undocumented relatives could be torn apart.
That's awful. It's a huge number.
It is.
And, you know, it brings up so many ethical and legal questions.
Like what?
Well, like what happens to the kids that are U.S. citizens if their parents are deported? What about the economic impact on the families and their communities? Those are the questions that get lost in all the political back and forth.
Absolutely. It's so easy to focus on the numbers, the statistics, the arguments,
Yeah.
but we can't forget that real people's lives are at stake.
Exactly. And that's why I think this whole deep dive is so important.
Yeah.
It's about getting into the details and the complexities and hearing the human side of this.
It's about asking the hard questions,
It is.
even if there aren't any easy answers.
Like, how do we even define a migrant criminal? Is it just someone who's in the country illegally, or is it someone who's committed an actual serious crime?
Yeah, and even if we could agree on what that means, how do we make sure that it's implemented fairly and humanely? How do we make sure that due process happens? How do we keep families from being unjustly separated?
These are conversations that we need to be having as a society.
We do.
It's not about taking sides. It's about talking about it thoughtfully and in a nuanced way.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that everyone has a different perspective, different priorities and values when it comes to this.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What can we as individuals do to make sense of this whole thing and try to help find some solutions?
Well, I think the first step is educating yourself.
Okay.
Read articles from different sources, listen to podcasts like this one, and talk to people with different opinions. The
Yeah.
more you know, the easier it'll be to have these conversations in a productive way.
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
Even if they make people uncomfortable or seem challenging, Challenge your own assumptions. Be open to different points of view and be willing to listen to people.
Absolutely. And you can also get involved in your community.
Okay.
Well, there are tons of organizations working on immigration at the local, state, and even national levels.
Right.
So you could volunteer your time, donate to an organization you care about, or just stay informed about the issues and make your voice heard.
Perfect. We've covered a lot today.
We have.
The horrific crime in New York, the anxiety of migrants, the complexity of immigration policy. It's a lot to take in, but I hope that this deep dive has helped you feel more informed, more engaged, and more empowered to participate in these important conversations.
Me too. And remember, this isn't just politics, it's people. And we need to pay attention to it, have empathy, and try to find solutions that represent our values as a nation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Of course.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Yes, it is.
Use it wisely.
And that's a wrap for today's video. We hope you enjoyed the journey with us. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all our latest content. A huge thanks to the makers at Boundaries Edge for bringing this to life. Be sure to check out the channel at Boundaries Edge for more exciting videos and deep dives. Until next time, keep pushing your boundaries to the edge.